This is the free audiobook of Elemental Power, written and read for you by April Ames. If you haven't listened to the previous chapters, you'll find the link to the playlist in the description below. There you can start at Chapter 1 or pick up where you left off. Part 1. Shattered. Chapter 6. Mystics of Rune. I felt my chest swaying from side to side as if I were aboard a ship mounting rolling waves. There were small points of pressure on my ribcage causing the movement. Something soft patted my cheek, and I opened my eyes to find Nanu kneading me and purring softly. His bright green eyes were inches from mine, and his faintly sweet animal smell made me cheerful. "Good morning, Nanu." I yawned, stretching and smacking my lips. Both Glenn and Gable were still sound asleep, even though the sun was just up.
"Good morning, my lady," Nanu replied, bowing. "You have visitors. Ambius sent me to fetch you. Make yourself ready and follow me."
He hopped nimbly from the bed to lounge on a floor pillow, waiting. "Visitors?" I asked, tying my robe and admiring the flowing sleeves. "Who would even know I'm here?"
"Everyone knows by now," Nanu answered, shrugging in an almost human way. "The whole world was on the lookout for you on Warlord's Day. These people have been traveling here for half a moon's cycle. Tidy up. They are waiting. The men will sleep."
"I'd like Glenn to come with me," I said, looking around for a mirror, only to have one appear suddenly beside me with a hairbrush, a bottle of tooth tonic, and a small wooden toothbrush. Nanu twitched his ears and jumped onto Glenn's sleeping form. Glenn didn't even flinch, remaining peacefully asleep. His bones looked very fine in the filtered morning light, but they possessed an unmistakable measure of strength. Nanu walked in a circle on Glenn's chest before sitting. "Why?" the cat asked, twitching his tail and exposing one fang in what I could only guess was a grimace. "I feel safer with him," I answered, dripping tooth tonic onto the bristles and beginning to brush. "Very well," he said, and began to knead, causing Glenn to stir. "Wait," I said, jumping to my feet and walking around the cot with the toothbrush hanging out of my foaming mouth. I pulled it free and said thickly, trying not to spit by accident, "Let me use the bathroom first." Nanu curled up on his chest to wait, rising and falling gently with Glenn's breathing.
"Of course, my lady. I, too, prefer to go unobserved."
I finished my morning constitutional and inclined my head, allowing Nanu to resume waking Glenn. He came awake with grace, opening his eyes, squinting at the cat, smiling and scratching the furry ears before sitting up and shifting Nanu to his lap. "Good morning, Alana." "Good morning, Nanu." A mirror and toiletries appeared for him as well. He had the beginnings of a beard, and he scratched it absently. "I have visitors," I told him as he combed his hands through his curly locks. "I don't want to go alone. Gable can stay asleep until we're done." "I'm glad you woke me. Who's visiting?" "I don't know. We need to hurry, though." He stood up, went to make his morning toilet, and I moved over close to Gable's cot to make sure he was okay. He lay all askew, with a nearly empty bottle of wine dripping onto his sleeve, still dressed in his filthy traveling clothes. A new robe hung a few feet away, untouched. His face was still covered by the snore stopper, and his limbs appeared to shoot out randomly from his torso at uncomfortable angles. I predicted that he would have one heck of a hangover. Glenn appeared beside me, ready. "Let's go," he said, and we walked together through the tent door, followed by Nanu. There was a new tent erected beside Ambius's hut, brilliantly adorned with flags and pennants of all different colors. As I passed into the open doorway, I saw that Eastern Lands was written on the green pennant that hung above it. Inside the conference tent there was a huge mahogany table with a carved wooden throne at the far end. Ambius was seated to the right of the throne, an old woman across from him to the left of it. There were 4 other women of varying ages sitting beside the old woman. Ambius was the only one on the right side of the table, and they were all staring at me. I moved to sit next to the eccentric wizard, but all of the women stood to their feet and bowed from the waist, each extending a hand to the throne indicating that they wanted me to sit there. Ambius squeezed my hand, and with a gummy grin also motioned me to sit on the throne. I was not at all comfortable with that. I glanced at Glenn in a hopeless attempt for backup, but he beamed that lovely smile of his and bowed himself low to me. I sighed, shuffled over to the throne, and sat down slowly. Everyone else sat as well. The old woman next to me had hair as white as snow, cataract-clouded green eyes, skin bronzed and wrinkled from the sun, and a gaudy ring on every finger. The other women, whom I now noticed looked like daughters and granddaughters, wore rings on their fingers, but also in their noses. They wore hooded cloaks the color of dried blood, and none but the oldest woman would meet my eyes. Not knowing what to do and feeling overwhelmed, I turned to Ambius for direction. He smiled happily, gums exposed, with bits of orange juice pulp in his beard and a spot of purple on his left breast. He nodded like a broken jack-in-the-box. The silence was beyond awkward. Glenn looked as bewildered as I did when I turned to him. He shrugged slightly. "Well, I'm not sure what's happening here," I began, my voice sounding too loud to my own ears. "But it'd be great if someone would tell me. And why do I have to sit on this throne? I'd much rather sit in a regular chair," I added. The old woman's face crinkled like a raisin as she smiled at me, revealing a mouth lacking the bottom row of teeth, and the few remaining top teeth were badly decayed. She laughed like the crackle of dried leaves underfoot, and I heard Glenn's heh of a half-laugh mingle with it. I smiled politely at her, wanting to laugh myself, but only from overwhelming anxiety.
"My dear, you are the promised one that we have waited through the wars and famines of the past 1,000 ages," she creaked, reaching out a hand sparkling with many colors from the various rings. "You must sit on the throne because it is yours. We are here because of you. We have much to tell you and much to learn." "But first, breakfast," Ambius sang and clapped his hands. Several men came in bearing trays of hot tea with the most elaborate spread of fruits I'd yet seen. "It looks as if this will be your second breakfast, Ambius," I whispered to the old man, picking a bit of pulp from his beard and touching it to the stain on his robe. He burst into laughter so hearty the curtained walls of the tent flowed in and out with the rhythm of it. "Quite right, my dear," he squeaked, wiping away tears from the deep wrinkles around his eyes. "Very observant of you. I never miss a breakfast if I can help it." The younger girls giggled, and we all served ourselves giant helpings of everything. The food took the edge off my apprehension. I was finishing what may have been a guava in genial silence when I noticed the youngest of the girls, perhaps 20 or so, batting her eyes at Glenn. He smiled in a friendly but reserved way at her and returned to his meal. I felt a stab of jealousy pierce through my heart, startled and angered by the intensity of it. I shook my head and breathed deeply to clear the sting, and noticed Ambius staring at me. He smiled like a wise old grandfather, winked, and patted my hand. It was as if he knew exactly what I had been thinking. I smiled broadly, trying to telepathically relay to him that I was fine. I may have looked a bit unhinged. He nodded as if he understood, piled a slice of pineapple high with chopped cherries, and crammed it into his gummy mouth. I was surprised that he could chew so much at once. A bit of cherry tumbled down his beard and landed on his chest. Now I knew where the purple stain had come from. I finished and pushed my plate away. I took a refill of the tea, though, dying for coffee. I felt like I needed to be completely awake for what came next. Everyone else finished moments later, and after the servers cleared the table and refreshed our drinks, we began the business of the day. "As you know," the elder woman spoke now with a clear, strong voice, "you are the one that was promised to us so long ago. We know that you come from another world. We know that you are unsure what it is you need to do. We know that you do not feel that this could be real. You were cast out of your world and drawn into ours, but in spite of that you still believe you are nothing special at all." I had to admit, put like that, it seemed silly to think I was just some ordinary person. Things like this didn't happen to ordinary people. But if I was extraordinary like they believed, it wasn't of my own doing. I listened, hoping she had answers. "We are the Order of Mystics from the Central Lands. I descend from the House of Crown. From the time my grandfather returned to this world with his wife and began our secret holy society, we have been waiting for you. They came back to this world to stop the legacy of our great-grandfather, the warlord. You are also the descendant of Crigil Lort." I nodded, but seeing that I didn't understand, the elder woman glanced down at her daughter. The woman seated next to her stood up with a large scroll in her hands. She set it reverently on the surface in front of me,
and pulled the top up, rolling it along the length of the table. It nearly reached the other end, being at least 10 feet long. On the parchment before me was a genealogical chart. I saw myself there at the very bottom, indicated by an elaborate question mark. Above me were my parents, grandparents, great-grandparents. The line only ran through one person in each generation. I stopped the search upward around the age, which I now understood to mean year, 1840. I looked back down at the question mark indicating my place, circled in gold filigree with the name Noble, and back at the elder woman. She smiled, took the bottom of the scroll, and began rolling it back upward until she stopped at the age 1099. She slid it in front of me. There were only 2 generations above it. At the very top of the scroll read the words, Generations of the Warlord on Earth. Just below that, a black smudge labeled Crydal Warlord was next to a red smudge labeled Ishara of Rune. They were joined together by a silver line. Beneath them were 3 circles. One was red, one brown, one blue. The red was labeled Annius Crown, the brown Ithacus Noble, and the blue Erastus Lords, and beside each of them was an empty, unlabeled circle joined to them by a silver line. Below each pair of circles, another circle with the same parent colors were attached by a line to hollow circles beside them. She explained that the hollow circles were the spouses of the important members of each generation. The circles below them were their offspring. Around the age labeled 1083, they all had more children. This time, though, the leftmost circle, the red, stopped its downward progression, but its spouse wasn't hollow, it was blue. The brown and blue lines continued downward as the generations went on, but the red crown line had ended around the age 1099. What happened here? I asked. The elder woman smiled and said,
That is when we began to resist the legacy of the warlord, and those 2, Micah's Crown and Sharia Lords, returned to the elemental world to start a plan of their own,
she answered, and continued to explain that in the 2nd generation the families on Earth began to draw apart, seeking to maintain the pedigree of each house. They were rich beyond measure and powerful as a result. They began secret societies wherever they settled, carrying the legacy of the warlord thousands of miles and realms away from its origin. I shifted in my seat. Everyone was looking at me.
I am the granddaughter, the 2nd generation, from the union of Micah's Crown and Sharia Lords. I am 532 ages old. I have waited a very long time to meet you, my dear,
she finished. What's your name?
I am Zorona, Crown Lords, High Priestess of the Order of Mystics, and Custodian of the Legends of Rune, she said. I am the last of this line. You are from the House of Noble.
I looked at her thoughtfully for a moment. All right, I said, nodding slowly. Tell me what I'm supposed to do, then. You seem to be the only one who can. It sent an electric shock through me, hearing that my name was Noble, Alana Noble. Ambius hiccuped loudly, and everyone at the table turned to look at him.
Don't mind me, Madame Zorana. I am an old man. Wind may escape me. I beg pardon in advance, he said, flapping his bony hands.
Yes, Ambius, she said, smiling at him. Now then, child, what you are to do. It's time you knew and were on your way. Please listen closely, both you and your elf, to what I am about to tell you.
I wondered why she had called Glenn my elf, but it didn't seem important just now. I heard a huff from the youngest granddaughter and a quick inward breath from Glenn. I'm listening, I said, and leaned in closely.
There are 3 tasks you must complete in order to stop the warlord's wickedness. First, you must unite the Watchers and turn their attention from their own realms back to the Creator and unify them. That will take up most of your time. Second, you must return here to Ambius and learn the ancient knowledge of the mystics, the legends of Rune. We are leaving that knowledge in his care, but only you will be allowed access to it. Third, you must be at the dead spring by sunrise of the final day to see the prophecy through to the end.
I sat back, but the throne was deeper than I estimated, making me fall backward ungracefully. Taking a moment to soak in the information, I shut my eyes and breathed slowly. A noisy slurp from Ambius preceded an equally noisy fart. I stole a covert glance at Glenn, who inconspicuously covered his nose and leaned away from the gaseous old wizard. I smiled and returned my mind to the subject at hand, hoping I remained upwind. I have questions, I told Zorana. She nodded, sat back as well, folded her hands in her robes, and listened. Who are the other watchers, and how will I convince them?
Oh, let me answer, Madame Zorana,
Ambius begged, bouncing up and down in his seat like a small child. Zorana nodded her agreement, and Ambius clapped his hands cheerfully.
Watchers were created in the heavenly realm, which exists outside the limits of space and time. We inhabit eternity in this form always, whereas humans and other temporal created beings are eternal only once the bodily interface has been shed, due to the confines of your simulated realities. Watchers are now exactly as we were created then. I am Ambius, Watcher of the Eastern Lands, a natural scholar and renowned wizard. My first job was in the Hall of Deeds, in the Palace of the Creator, noting everything done by the angels within my jurisdiction. After the war in heaven broke out, and a third of the angels were cast from the heavenly places, the Creator sent watchers to every realm to guard them against falling as well. Earth, his most precious possession, fell anyway. You'll know the story of Adam and Eve, I suppose?
Yes, I said, fascinated by my quick answer. Did I know that story? My mouth said yes, but no memory surfaced.
Well, it's all true,
he said, taking a sip from his cup.
And there are still guardians in your realm as well. Here we have 4 lands. There is a central land too, but they have no watcher. Southward, you will find Rock, the great salamander and watcher of the southern lands. Those with fire in their veins are changeable, cunning, and will burn you as quickly as any bonfire. Watchers are not safe, nor do they show you all of themselves. Rock, in particular, is the most dangerous of all, I think, and my dearest friend of old.
A tinge of sadness darkened his crinkled face.
Next is Silver, the mermaid queen of the West. She watches the water sprites and other creatures in the western lands. Meeting with her may be a bit tricky, seeing you're land-bound and she's a water dweller, but you'll find a way, I'm sure. Finally, to the north, you'll find Worm, the enormous earthworm who tunnels through his lands. When you have met with them all and returned here to me, your first task will be complete.
I leaned forward, looking into the wizard's kind face. Am I going to have to convince you to join with them, or can I go ahead and check you off the list?
Oh, I am ready and waiting, my lady, he said, bowing to me. Your mere presence here has galvanized me to the task.
What about the Central Lands? You say they have no watcher, so do I need to go there at all?
No,
Zorana broke in abruptly.
Do not go to the Central Lands. They are the most war-torn of all the lands, and fighting continues to this day. You will have to journey there for the final task, but until then, keep away. The fairies constantly battle over the castle of Rune and the Dead Spring, 2 factions seeking control. We came from the Central Lands, but we remain hidden as much as possible. Within our land, the 2 greatest points of power in the world were placed, and much blood has been spilled on that ground.
Including my own, I muttered. Every head at the table snapped toward me, except for Glenn's, which turned slowly because he already knew how bloody I was when I had emerged from the spring. The throne was hard and digging into my butt bones. I squirmed.
Is this true?
Zorana and Ambius asked simultaneously, staring wide-eyed at Glenn. Yes, a startled Glenn replied.
This is terrible news,
Zorana said, rubbing her liver-spotted hands across her forehead.
Have you been followed?
She asked. Yes, Glenn answered. The cat told us so.
My name is Nanu, said a dull voice from somewhere near my feet.
They have been,
Ambius said, ignoring this.
I have seen it.
Well then, there isn't a moment to lose,
Zorana said, rising to her feet and rushing up to me, gripping both my arms and shaking vigorously.
You must get to the south. You must make it to Rock as quickly as possible, she hissed.
Why? What is the danger? Glenn asked. His hands went to his waist, expecting to find the hilt of a sword, but finding himself unarmed, clenched his fists instead. Zorana looked at him closely, asking,
"You are her protector, I assume?"
"I am, yes." He bowed to her and straightened. She reached him in 4 long strides, her step amazingly stable for being 5 centuries old. She raised her hands above her head and put them, palms facing inward, as high as she could reach. He bent his face down between them, and she pressed his cheeks firmly. Her eyes closed, and her wrinkled mouth tightened to the point that her lips turned white. Glenn's eyes remained open, but clouded over slowly with a milky white film. Zorana released her grip and staggered back a pace, his eyes slowly returning to blue.
"You have a very dedicated protector,"
Zorana said, winking at me.
"I could not have wished for a better warrior to protect the only hope our world has."
"I'll need my bow," Glenn said, just above a whisper. He seemed disoriented and put a hand to his temple.
"Where is it?"
Zorana asked. "It's at my house," he answered. "We did not pack for a long journey, only to come see Ambius."
"Worry not, brave elf," Ambius chimed. "You will find all that you need in the tent when you return to her. Simply think of your bow or anything else you require, and it will come to you. Now, Lady Alana, what we must discuss now need not concern you. You may go. It is time for Gable to awaken. If he feels ill, simply think of a cure tonic, and it will present itself."
I was suddenly aware of how tired I was. It had been just after dawn when I'd stepped into the council. Now it was well after noon. My stomach growled, and I hurried into our tent. Without Glenn by my side, I felt exposed, and I still didn't know exactly what was following me. Gable was just as I had left him, but free of the snore stopper. It lay on the ground next to him in a crumpled heap. He must have gotten up sometime to relieve himself. His long, guttural snores were grating on my nerves. I thought of how hungry I was and how hungry he must be, and 2 giant bowls of salad appeared before me with piles of guacamole and sprouts. I thought of a hangover cure, too, and a fizzy blue liquid appeared on the floor beside his cot. Setting the tray down, I put my hand on his chest and said, "Wakey, wakey, eggs and bakey." He startled, shouting loudly, hurling the wine bottle at my head and flouncing on the cot as if I was attacking him. When his mind cleared, he stared blankly at me with bloodshot eyes. "Oh, it's you." "Yep," I said, thankful that he had such bad aim. "It's lunchtime. I brought you some food and a headache cure. It's beside your bed." He sat up and rubbed his hands over his face. "Thanks." I bent down, picked up the tonic and handed it to him. He smiled at me, and I realized that for once it was sincere. I returned the smile and handed him a bowl. We ate by his cot in silence. Somehow I'd become accustomed to eating this way already. I felt perfectly satisfied with these fresh foods. I began to get thirsty, and a glass of iced sweet tea appeared on the tray. "What's that?" Gable asked with his mouth full. "Iced tea. Ever had cold tea before?" I asked. "Blah," he said. "Why would you want cold tea?" I handed him the glass. "Try it." He took a tiny sip, as if it were full of poison. His lips pursed and he shook his head as he swallowed reluctantly. "Not for me, thanks. Any wine?" "You don't need any wine," I chided, but as I said it, a bottle appeared in his hands. "Oh, I do love working for Master Ambius," he said, smacking his lips and popping the cork. "He has the best wine, and it never runs out." "Gable, you should really wait a bit. You just drank your cure. Talk with me for a while before you drift off again." "Eh?" he asked, watching the watery red liquid purl into the glass that had just appeared. "What do you mean, drift off?" I reached out and touched the hand that gripped the wine glass. He looked at me, his large dark eyes meeting mine squarely. He was handsome like his brother, very handsome. He was dark where his brother was light, thicker in stature and flamboyant in spirit. And unlike Glenn, he knew he was attractive. And when he saw my thoughts reflected in my eyes, he smiled, and it glowed brightly, the Ellenville legacy. "Are you sure you should touch me?" he asked. Something decidedly unfriendly crept into his voice, and I removed my hand. I now saw the venom dripping from that brilliant smile. Why not? I knew why I wouldn't want to touch him again, but was curious as to why he thought I shouldn't. He ignored me and drank his glass of wine in one continuous gulp. I lost my appetite. He had retreated again, hiding behind the booze. I wondered what haunted him so much that he couldn't stay sober. I went to lie down on my cot, no longer in the mood for a chat and needing distance between us. Gable remained on his bed, eating and drinking as if he were a dying man. He opened his mouth wide to bite, and I found it vaguely nauseating to watch him eat. The noise of his chewing was growing louder, and I wished I had something to block out the racket. Suddenly, all sound silenced, and I was left in peace. A note flitted down beside my pillow that read, "When the snorer awakens and you can no longer block him out, you can always block your own ears." I wished Ambius a kiss on the cheek and felt sure it had been delivered. I curled into a ball and began to doze, images of Glenn and Gable battling for dominance in my subconscious. I must have surrendered to sleep because I was rudely awakened by a weight plopping down by my legs. A hand crept up my thigh, and I looked up to see Gable, glazed over with wine and that dangerous look back in his eyes that made my blood run cold. "What's wrong?" I asked, sitting up and edging away quickly. Not so quick as to seem frightened, but I was already shaking.
"I loved her,"
he said, slurring terribly. His hand, now removed from my thigh, clenched beside its twin in his lap. What? There were 3 empty bottles of wine by his cot. How long had I been out? "Her!" he shouted. I scooted back even farther, perching on my pillows. Her, Lillian. My heart, my soul. She was so beautiful. She wasn't dark-haired like you. Her hair was sunshine. Her skin was bronze and her eyes were clear, cool blue like the glaciers of the north. Her lips, well, her lips left kisses on mine that still wake me from sleep and leave me wanting, he growled, moving in closer. Glenn's wife? I asked, feeling sick at his revelations. Oh, yes, his wife, he snarled, laughing at the title with disgust and delight mingled together. She was beautiful, he repeated, and she was devious. My kind of woman. He laughed without humor. Another bottle of wine appeared at his feet, and he picked it up, opened it with his teeth, and drank from it deeply, no longer regarding propriety. She was pure as the northern snow when she met my brother, inexperienced, innocent, helpless. The kind of woman who can't survive without a man to tell her what to do or how to think and to bear children. Then she met me, and I awakened the aching in her soul. I made her yearn. We burned together for a long time. His eyes were far away, visions of her reviving in his memory. What stopped you? I asked, unable to contain my curiosity, as if staring at the carnage of a train wreck. He found out, he said, spitting on the dirt floor. He made her choose. She could stay with him and be a proper elf woman, or stay with me and feel more deeply, more truly, consume and be consumed with passion for the rest of her life. I'm sure he didn't put it like that. No, fool, he snapped, his eyes as sharp as knives stabbing into my face. He said she could stay with him, or he would set her free. It was her choice. He wouldn't stop her. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. He wanted to talk, and I was unable to escape. I thought about how courageous Lynn was to find his wife cheating with his brother and offer to let her leave him. My heart broke for him, hearing this confession. She chose him, the absent soldier, he said after taking another large gulp. She said our love was too hot to last. We were together for the last time that night, and then I left. I didn't see her again until it was too late. It was true. He was radiating heat, and I was afraid to touch him for fear of being singed. He was turned away from me, clutching the bottle to his chest and weeping silently. I reached out slowly, cautiously, still doubting the wisdom of touching him. My fingers barely skimmed his sleeve, but that was all it took. We could burn together, you and I. The bottle dropped with a thud onto the dirt floor, red liquid splashing out. He lunged at me, fingernails digging into my upper arms, painfully pinning me in place. I can feel the ache in your soul, he said, breath coming shallow and fast. He stank with wine, and it made my stomach turn. I clenched my teeth and turned away, but he pulled my face to his, attempting to kiss me. There is fire in you. I can taste it. I wriggled desperately, trying to free myself. We were alone in this tent, and even if I screamed, No one would hear me. He must have seen that realization reflected in my face. He laughed and pulled me in for another disgusting kiss, so I bit his tongue as hard as I could until he screamed and pulled away. "Get off me!" I rolled sharply to my right and off the cot, escaping his grasp and throwing him off the other side. He cursed and jumped up. Fury pulsed from him. He wiped blood from his mouth and adjusted himself in his trousers. Panic started rising. No, no, no. I wished for Glenn with all of my strength. I backed into a dressing screen, scooting on my bottom, and it crashed down behind me. I curled into a ball. Gable began to advance, his hands beginning to unfasten his pants. I felt bile rise in my throat. The tent door swept aside and Glenn rushed in. He was already alerted to trouble somehow. When he saw Gable advancing menacingly, his mouth bloody and his pants undone, with me shaking in the fetal position, he jumped in front of me, covering 9 paces and only 2. "What's going on here, brother?" he asked, the word brother a curse on his tongue, clenching his fists and towering over Gable. "Nothing," Gable replied bitterly. "This one is faithful. Better luck with her." I could only see Glenn's back from my place on the floor, but I noticed the tips of his pointy ears had turned beet red. He was trembling faintly and he shifted his stance to fight. He reached again for a sword that wasn't there. "It's all right," I said, rising and placing a hand on his back. "Gable is drunk. He made a mistake. I'm not hurt." Glenn whirled on me. His fervent eyes searched mine for the truth. I let down every wall, every shield I had built to protect myself, and showed him the plain truth of everything. Gable saw it too, and I heard the tent flaps swish shut as he stalked out into the late afternoon sun. Glenn took me in his arms and held me. There was nothing more in his embrace than relief, and I let it seep into me to stop the shaking that had begun once the danger had ended. "How did you know to come?" I asked, my voice muffled, speaking into the fabric over his chest. "Ambius told me that you needed me. He said you asked for me urgently." He pulled away to look into my face. "I did. I very much did. Thank you." I pulled him back and held him tightly, breathing in the scent of woods and wind that exuded from him. "Thank you," I said again. Neither of us seemed eager to let go, and I soaked it in. The cold afternoon sun spilled through the fabric, casting a brazen glow over everything. The sigh of the wind flowed through the barren trees and shook the forest with the rattle of bones. Wine tinged the air with its fragrance and stained the dirt floor where Gable's bottles lay discarded. I wondered what the boys' parents had been like. The boys couldn't have been more different if they had been raised on separate planets. I felt a twinge of sorrow for Glenn. His own brother had stolen his wife. That kind of betrayal leaves a mark. If you enjoyed this chapter, please give it a like and/or a comment. And if you think someone else might enjoy the story, please share with them the first chapter. If you subscribe and turn the notification bell on, you'll be the first to know when the new chapter is released.